Hi, I'm Robbie Felix, and today I'm going to be talking about some basic principles of reality, kind of foundational ideas which, when you recognize them, they're paradigm shifts. They change the way that you experience yourself, other people, and all of life. So that is a big pitch, and these are big ideas. So let's get right to it. Principle number one is the principle of mystery. This is the recognition that nobody knows what's happening. At a fundamental level, nobody understands what is happening here in this reality, in this world, where it all came from, what it means, how we are conscious. There's all of these things which are fundamentally mysterious, and not just mysterious like we don't know the answer, right? Like, you know, like before Einstein had figured out relativity, we didn't know the answer to what happens as you approach the speed of light, for example. And then he figured it out, and now we do know the answer. So it's not just something which is unknown, but something which is unknowable. And I want to make a distinction here between the absolute and the relative. And I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but a lot of people will say, well, science is figuring things out and we're getting more understanding every day. And it's true. And this is not a knock against science. I love science. It's very important. It's very interesting. It's super useful. But science produces relative truths. It produces truths about the relative world. So given that things exist, reality is happening, and we are conscious of that, given those three miracles, science will then explain a bunch of like how all of that works, like once you're inside it. What the principle of mystery is saying is that those first three things are miraculous and fundamentally unknowable. There will never be a description in the language of human beings, in the language of science, in the language of mathematics, that explains why there is something happening and not nothing, and how there are conscious beings experiencing that happening. And so why is this so important? Honestly, just paying attention to this changes my state. When I notice this, when I remember this, something happens where I go from being a more detached observer of what's happening to being a direct experiencer. And so that's what happens for me. It also loosens up a bunch of just kind of tight thinking and limited ideas of reality. It lets go of a lot of fear. Like Terence McKenna says this thing, we don't know enough to be anxious. And that the principle of mystery can really help with that, of just going, wait a second, I don't know what's happening here. Nobody knows what's happening here. I mean, right now in COVID times, this is especially applicable. Now this is a relative truth, right? Like, so we want to still be careful about like the difference between the absolute and the relative truth. The absolute truth is the fact of reality and the fact of consciousness. Those things are inexplicable and will never be explained. The relative truth is nobody knows what's going to happen COVID times 6 months from now, a year from now, in terms of public health, in terms of the economy. And so we're all in this unknown. But you can use that relative unknown is frightening for a lot of people. But you can use that absolute unknowability to just kind of relax a little bit into the moment and just say, like, I don't know how I got here, and I don't know where I'm going, and that's always been true, and that will always be true, COVID or no COVID. And there is something, for me, and I think for a lot of people, this is a way of relaxing and surrendering to life. So that's the first principle of mystery. Nobody knows what the hell is happening. The second principle is the principle of creativity. This is the recognition that you are creating the circumstances of your life. So a lot of people live their lives as if they don't have choice about the circumstances of their life. Or maybe they feel they have a little choice. Like, oh, I could choose between this job or this job. I could choose between this relationship or that relationship. I could choose to be friends with this person or not, within a very limited sphere of influence, within a very kind of narrow set of choices. And the principle of creativity is the recognition that you're actually making the whole thing up, and you get to choose. And you get to choose from a far larger palette than you think. Now, I want to throw in a couple of caveats here, which is a little dangerous. And a lot of people that will talk about this, you probably heard this idea before. A lot of people will be very convicted and kind of absolutist about this. Like, you 100% determine your reality. Reality is a dream, and you are the dreamer, and you can change every last detail. I don't think that that frame is actually the most useful. I understand why people use it, and I do think that there's a lot of power in it, because it just takes away any objection, any kind of room for doubt, and you're just left with this very potent, like, you are creating your life. What's really true is you are co-creating your life. So you are putting energy, intention, action into the world, and the world is responding. So this is not a kind of erasure of the differences and advantage that people have, right? Some people are born with all kinds of different advantages over other people. So it's not to say that, like, well, if somebody is poor and somebody else is rich, then that rich person just manifested better. They just wanted things better, and they worked harder, and they just deserve it, and everybody is getting exactly what they deserve. Okay, that's kind of like the dangerous end of this style of thinking. So I want to warn against that. It's not that. This is a co-creative process. There's my input into the thing, and then there's life's response, and there's a conversation between the two things. But just because you are to some degree limited by the circumstances of life doesn't mean that you don't have way more control over those circumstances than you believe. And so there's just a widening of freedom that's possible when you take this perspective on. And we could go into huge detail about this. I have another 5 principles to talk about, so I'm going to move on pretty soon. But the 2 things to work with around this are your beliefs about what you can have, and just noticing, well, what are my beliefs about what I can have? And then also, and this is the single most powerful thing, whenever you are in a situation that you don't like, or you have circumstances that you don't like, whether that's a tiny little interaction with someone at work, or whether that's like a huge thing like your health or your financial situation, the question to ask yourself is, what would I like? And to answer that question from a place of no consideration for how to get it, or whether you deserve it, or whether it's possible for you to get. So you don't say, what would I like? Well, I'd like to live in a mansion with a pool and a view of the ocean, but like I can never have that. So I guess I'll just take like a house, any house, as long as it's, X size or whatever. None of that. Okay. When you ask yourself what you would like, you answer with what you would like if you just got to make it up, and then that's it. That's not to say that you don't take the medium-sized house that doesn't have a pool, but you still, it makes you feel good when you step inside, right? There's a process, and it's co-creative. But this question of what would I like, and just coming into alignment with that, and then taking the action that you need to take to get those things. This is hugely life-changing. The first thing was the recognition of the mystery is life-changing on an absolute level, of just like my immediate consciousness changes. This recognition of creativity is a huge transformation on the relative level, where you actually get to make up the circumstances of your life. Okay, I'm moving on. Principle number 3 is the principle of connection. This is just the recognition that we all feel each other. And we feel each other kind of regardless of the things that we present. So if I'm having an interaction with you and I'm presenting as, oh, I'm doing well, I'm happy, and like, yeah, like I'm killing it at work and whatever, but underneath I'm actually really sad. You can feel that sadness even if I don't give any external clues. And the same thing if you're really excited, but you're trying to keep a lid on it because you don't want someone else to be upset. They're going to be able to feel that even if you don't give any external clues. I'm going to get very briefly into the mechanism of this. There are two competing ideas of what the mechanism is. One is that micro expressions, tiny little cues of timing, even like the blood flow in the skin moisture, things like that, the sort of things that they try to measure with a polygraph test. So real external manifestations of your internal state, which the other person is unconsciously picking up because we're just so highly trained and highly wired as social beings to be able to do that. So that's one possible mechanism. The other mechanism is that on some non-relative level, on an absolute level, we're all connected, we're all one being, and so there's some flow of information which doesn't travel through the relative, through gross physical reality, but travels directly through the absolute. I'm not even going to throw in about which of those I believe. Both of those beliefs are actually just tools. But either way, we feel each other. So you might be saying, well, no, but we can lie to each other, right? Like you can fool people and someone might be hiding what they're really feeling, right? And all of that's true. And that's true because we've signed a kind of communal contract to believe each other's bullshit. So when somebody is feeling really sad, but saying that they feel happy, we've kind of agreed to believe the bullshit that they're happy. Now, we've done that so much, and we've been trained in that to such a high degree that it's totally unconscious. It's a totally unconscious mechanism for most people now. And so most of us go through life basically just believing the presentation that people give about how they're doing or who they are. But the recognition of connection, the recognition that we can actually feel each other, feel what's really going on in the other person, feel their intention, feel their emotion, that recognition is a way of opening a door to being able to consciously know and see these things. Now, there's a danger of this one too. The danger is that you decide that you know what someone's experiencing and become completely convicted of that and get into a fight with them about it, or just override their own report of their experience. And so maybe, in men's circles, for example, this is something that'll happen where someone will say, oh man, like a men's circle is a place where you start to train to cut through someone's bullshit and be able to see what's really going on. And then you might see, oh, this guy's angry. And you're like, you're angry. And the guy's like, no, I'm not angry. And you're like, yeah, you're angry. I can feel that you're angry. You're full of shit and you're angry. And that kind of fight is just not useful. Two things could be going on. One, he is angry and he's not ready to see it yet, in which case you bullying him into trying to see it is not actually going to get him to see it any sooner. So it's not useful in that way. And actually, it's just breaking rapport. And two, maybe he's not really angry, and actually you're angry, and it's a projection, which we'll talk about another time. But in which case, you were wrong. So we can feel each other, but you have to tread carefully, and you have to stay humble and kind of hold the first truth as higher, the mystery that ultimately we don't really know what's going on, and we can feel each other. Okay, so that's number 3, connection. The fourth principle is the principle of health. This is the recognition that you can be more or less well, and you can be more or less happy. Now that might sound obvious, but there's actually a trap that we can get into where everything starts feeling relative. Like, well, I could do that, but I could also do this, and like they both seem fine, and who knows, right? Like that first principle, like who knows what the real outcome is going to be, and who knows, like that Zen story. there's a Zen story. I'm just gonna do the really short version, but there's an old man and his son gets injured, and everybody comes to him and says, "Oh no, your son is injured. This is terrible." And the old man says, maybe so. And then the army comes along and they recruit all the young men from the village, but they don't recruit his son because the son was injured. And so then the people come and they're like, "Oh, that's so lucky that your son wasn't recruited." And the old man says, "Maybe so." And it just goes on like this, right? All these things happen, and everybody else is like, "That's a good thing. That's a bad thing." And the old man is just always like, we'll see. Maybe he says, "We'll see." He says something like that. So that is kind of hanging out in that first truth, that mystery. But you don't want to get stuck there, because if you just live from that, like, who knows, then it's paralyzing. There's no way of knowing which direction to move in. So you have to reincorporate this recognition that there's such a thing as being more or less well and more or less happy, and then orient yourself towards more wellness and more happiness. And that's it. It's pretty simple. The fifth principle is the principle of evolution. And this one is very close to my heart. I absolutely love this one. So we might spend a little bit longer on it. But the basic idea is that evolution is a native process of reality. It's not something that just happened by accident, given a certain set of initial circumstances at the beginning of life on Earth. It's actually something that's been happening from the moment that the universe began, and so predates biological evolution and will post-date biological evolution. It transcends and includes biological evolution. So what is this thing, evolution? Evolution is the increasing complexity and increasing depth of reality. So reality just generates novelty. So it keeps generating new things. It is a novelty generating engine, but it's also it doesn't just generate like, well, this bacteria, and then this different bacteria, and then another bacteria, and then this is a different bacteria, and here's an endless parade of bacteria, and each one is different than the last. But actually, it keeps producing things of increasing depth and complexity. So at the beginning of the universe, we had the Big Bang. We had an undifferentiated sea of hydrogen, just this gigantic cloud of hydrogen. And then gradually, as time passed, and you could go back even further than that and things were even simpler, but gradually as time passed, the hydrogen condensed and it turned into stars, and then the stars exploded and they spat out denser elements, and you got increasingly more elements, more different things going on. You started getting planets orbiting the second generation of stars that were made from the dead matter from the first generation of stars. And so there's this increasing complexity, always increasing complexity. And then you get to Earth, which is our one example of biological evolution, and you get this life starts to happen, and it goes from just being kind of geological things happening and chemical things happening to biological things happening, increasing complexity, increasing depth. The first life is these single cell organisms, these very simple things, but gradually they get more and more complex. And they leverage a process of natural selection, which speeds up the native process of evolution in the universe. But it's an amplifier. It's not the whole deal, right? There already is this native evolutionary drive in reality. And so evolution, biological evolution, then we get to humans, and then humans are the main exhibitors of cultural evolution. So this is another mechanism, like natural selection. We have another mechanism, cultural evolution, which amplifies even more the native evolutionary impulse of reality and speeds things up even faster. So cultural evolution, we've evolved in so many ways faster than animals. Not biologically, like our bodies haven't changed that much in the last 10,000 years, but our minds and our reality has transformed beyond recognition, right? Clearly. And this process is not going to stop. We'll find other amplifiers even more potent than cultural evolution, and will evolve in new dimensions, just like we stopped evolving biologically and started evolving. I mean, we still kind of evolving biologically, but but our cultural evolution moves so much faster than our biological evolution that it doesn't really matter that we're still evolving biologically. There's going to be new processes that are analogous with that are so much faster than our cultural evolution that the changes in our cultural evolution aren't even going to matter. And so the main useful, this is very abstract, very high level concept. The main thing it's useful for is just to recognize that you are part of a process which has been going on since the moment of the creation of the universe, and you are the leading edge. You are in exactly the most potent, richest moment in the history of the universe right now. And that's going to continue to be true for all of reality. It just keeps getting richer, keeps getting deeper, it keeps getting more potent. Another useful corollary of this idea is that things weren't better in the past. And that's a kind of meme that a lot of people get into in one way or another. Like, oh man, like it was better back then. And if only, we could go back to when we all lived in villages and we just kind of wove things with our cloths and la la la. It's not true. Things weren't better then. They were worse then. We moved on and we improved things. Now, that's not to say that things only get better. There is a good news, bad news, and this a lot of this comes from the integral theory and the work of Ken Wilber. There is a good news, bad news aspect to this evolution. So the great example is rocks don't get cancer, dogs do, and dogs don't have identity crises. Humans do, right? So as you increase the complexity and the depth of the system, there is increased potential for pathology. Cancer in a dog that you wouldn't get in a rock. Identity crisis in a human you wouldn't get in a dog. But there's also increased capacity for beauty, for consciousness, for creativity, and all of these great things. So the trade-off is worth it, but it's not wholly good. Okay, that's the principle of evolution. Home stretch now. The sixth principle, I don't have a good name for. I'm just going to call it humanness, but that's not a good name, so I apologize. I just couldn't find one. But this is the principle that reality is intelligent, loving, caring, connected, creative by definition. It is those things tautologically. And the reason it is because human beings are an expression of reality, and human beings are all of those things. So human beings are creative, they're conscious, they're intelligent, they're loving, they're caring, they're interconnected. And reality is also all of those things. And this is just an antidote to this. This is an Alan Watts kind of idea. It's an antidote to this idea that like we are somehow separate from what's happening, and there's me, and then there's all of this stuff that's happening, and I'm kind of sat outside of it in some weird way, watching it all happen. And reality is just these rocks crashing into each other, and I got to make sure I don't get hit by the rocks. When the truth is, I am made of the same stuff as everything else. You are made of the same stuff as everything else, and you are intelligent, loving, conscious, all of those things. I am intelligent, loving, conscious, all of those things. So reality is intelligent, loving, and conscious, and all of those things. Okay, the seventh principle is the principle of goodness, and it's the recognition that reality is fundamentally good. And unlike the previous principle where I justified those assessments of reality, intelligent, loving, caring, all the things, by recognizing that human beings are part of reality, this one stands alone. It's not justified by anything. It doesn't follow from some other idea. It's just a recognition of the fundamental goodness of reality. Okay, those are the 7 principles. I hope that this has been helpful, interesting, mind expanding in some way. If there's even just one that like caught your attention, that shifted your state in some way, that made you start thinking about things in a different way, made you start experiencing things in a different way, I would just write it down and hang out with it for a while. Just kind of meditate on it, whatever that means to you, whether that's really sitting down, folding your legs and meditating on it, or just having it be an idea in your life for a little while. So that's my invitation to you. And I would love to hear from you. If you have questions, thoughts, your own experiences you want to share, please reach out. Thank you for watching, and be well.